name is Emanuel Class, and I am here to be your host for a very first of its kind podcast. I'll be joined today on this adventure by Anthony D'Astello and Andrew Lowen to discuss their recent game convention experience together and the games that they produce. Say hello, gentlemen.
What's up?
Hey, good to
Awesome.
be here.
It's good to have you both here. So now, first up, I think it's important for the audience members to know a little bit about you before we get into like the juicy topics of discussion. So, Andrew, I'd love to hear from you first. Can you tell the audience who you are, how you got your start into gaming, and kind of your history around games?
Yeah, so I played lots of them, many years and many genres of games, but it started really with like the JRPG. Secret of Mana was the entrance into gaming, and really the first time my mind was exploded by a game. I was like 10 years old playing Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo, which my 5th grade class bought for me as a class. Like I invited I went to this little private school, had all my class join me for my birthday. And, when I turned 10, and they all pitched in and got me this game. And I love that thing.
That's awesome.
That was like playing a book, like
Oh, yeah.
the Japanese RPG and RPGs in general. I think it feels like you're actually engaging in a book. And so I got super into those, Final Fantasy VII and Chrono Trigger and lots of others. And so eventually I got into trading card games. I played Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon very competitively.
Nice.
And then I transitioned back into Warcraft 3, so a real-time strategy game, Diablo series of games, and games like Baldur's Gate. That's kind of when they, were coming out. And so I had a lot of fun with those things. I think I actually passed a college economics class because of how smart I was in Diablo 2 trading.
Nice.
I fully give that credit to Diablo 2, helping me pass that economics class with like an A, like a high A. And then I got into World of Warcraft. I spent 24,000 hours, not an exaggeration at all. It's 985 days played back to back in about a 10-year period on a rogue. And I was very good. I shredded. I was a raid leader, guild leader, all of that. At one point was the, 33rd highest ranked arena team in the world. With my partner, which, so I had one arena partner that went and won the first BlizzCon. And then I had another arena partner that I was just mentioned. He ended up taking another rogue. Because I kind of stopped, I stopped being so hardcore in WoW. But he took 3rd at BlizzCon the next year. It was like 2008.
That's awesome.
2009. And then I became a professional Hearthstone player, teaching people how to get legend and whatnot. And I discovered board games after that because I decided to quit video games cold turkey.
Cold turkey.
Yeah, it was
got any more than video games?
Yeah. So going from being a professional, semi-professional poker player and professional Hearthstone player, which means I made about $400 a week playing Hearthstone, teaching people how to hit legend. I got into board games then, and eventually I made one, which is pretty storied. Maybe we'll talk about that later.
Definitely.
And just have always loved kind of getting transported into a different world. I just have great appreciation for that. So
right on. I love that story. I know a lot of us can share that same feeling of like which video game or tabletop game got you into it and the pathway you kind of take through it and getting competitive, like wanting to be the best at it. And then once you hit that lofty achievement, teaching other people, right?
Yeah.
It really gives you a granular, fundamental understanding of games and, the experience of the gamer. And so I think those are really important things when you are breaking out to make your own game, is being able to see it from those perspectives.
Right.
So Anthony, same question. I'd like to turn the tables on you here.
Okay. I think I'm going to answer this question a little differently than I have in the past because I've never had to answer it right next to Andrew. So, but honestly though, with it, I started off, and I think I've got 2 trajectories that kind of come together. I started off as a young kid. I was the youngest by 8 years in my family. There was four of us, and my brother was 15. He was into hunting and fishing and all that stuff. We were more rural town, small town, Midwestern Ohio or
Mm-hmm.
Midwestern
Mm-hmm.
United States. And so then, he was not into any of that stuff. And he was 15 when I came around, and I had a sister 13 and a sister 8. So none of them were involved in any of the stuff I was involved in. And I had a few friends around the town within walking and bike riding distance, but like not many nerds. There was one other kid in in my friend group that was also pretty smart guy into nerdy stuff. And so we just kind of nerded together,
Mm-hmm.
and when we were not with each other, we were non-nerds, and then we were nerds together because it wasn't as in fashion as it is nowadays. But back then, even younger, when I wasn't, just before that, I would like get out Risk or something like that, and I wanted to play. But like, who wants to play Risk generally? If you're just looking like general people, not gamers, and then on top of it, who wants to play with like an 8-year-old? So it was one of those things where I just was stuck playing by myself a lot of games.
Mm.
So I made up the AI rules and that kind of stuff back then because I was like, well, if nobody's going to play, I got to play with myself. So I'm sitting there and I've got the things out, and I've got the enemy, colors, and I'm like, well, how do we determine what they do? And so I made up rules for generally if this, then that, and here's what they'll do, on their turn, how they'll expand, all that. And then that got boring after a while. So then I took the little, I don't know if you remember the little creatures. I forget what they were called. They're like, you'd have like a penguin and a tree and these other things,
Mm-hmm.
but you put your finger over the heat transfer sticker and it would show what element they were. You remember those? Anybody?
Classic.
No?
Before my
Okay.
time.
No. So anyway, there was these toys. Well, like the little wrist men were this big and these things were this big. So like I had them as kaiju that would like randomly, it had a chance of showing up, kind of like Catan with like the Raiders would come or something. But these would be like kaiju that would start stomping, come in from the ocean and start stomping across the territory. So that would be like a surprise thing you'd have to deal with, or it might help you and like crush the AI enemies. So that's me at like 8, 9, 10 years old, doing it all with D6s. So
Awesome.
that's it just went from there. I've just always loved games. I've loved game mechanics. When I got old enough to get into video games, computer games that weren't like just an Atari racing game or something, I really loved the 4X games. Heroes of Might and Magic was my jam,
Oh yeah.
because that was the main one, and Master of Orion too, and those were my jams. And so I love the 4X and I love game mechanics, but I also really love story and like the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon back in the day, back then when it wasn't reruns. I watched that and thought, oh, I love the magical, fantastical story. And I always wanted a way to combine them. And role-playing games does that. So that's why I've ended up where I am. You get the story elements, but you also can get, if you do it right, the 4X kind of elements where it's like character crafting and progression and strategy and achievements and all of that. So it just kind of brings it all together.
That's awesome. You definitely have that I was gonna be a game developer when I grow up story, right? Like 8 years old, nobody wants to play Risk with me, so I make my own rules. This is how it's
Solo
going to.
mode.
Yeah, it's awesome. Man, I've got some pretty great stories about Risk, but one that, Andrew kind of touched on a little bit was like the introduction of Final Fantasy. And I actually got that from you, Anthony. Like, a lot of my gateway into gaming started out with like showing up at your house and you being like, sit down and play this game for the next 24 to 48 hours. I'll talk to you later. Or like, the first time you brought Allies of Majesty over, right?
Yeah,
It was like, I think around Christmas time, right? It was a holiday or something. Everybody was together
yeah,
and you were like, I made this game. Everybody should come sit down and play it. And I had never played a like RPG that wasn't like a Final Fantasy or a JRPG or something.
right.
And you were like, all right, so you can make your own character. You can be anything. You're gonna be an angel. And I got super into like making my first character right there at the dinner table. And like made a special sword and I drew it out and I named it. And then the first like mission, my guy dies and loses his special sword, and it's all like just story of tragedy. but it was a blast. And then immediately after, it was like, all right, you ready to play again? I was like, but I died. And you're like, but you're an angel. You don't die. And so that story has always stuck with me as like kind of the genesis into gaming for me is Allies 0.0001 or whichever version it was back then, the
That's
proto
awesome.
version. So it's rare to get to interview two game developers at the same time. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the games you produce. Andrew, I hear Deliverance is the highest funded and highest rated Christian game on Kickstarter to date.
Well, so we were beat by about $8,000 in funding by
Uh-oh.
Ezra and Nehemiah,
Okay.
which I hope to change. I think I pushed them over the edge because I plugged that game, and I like those guys. I wanted them to do as well as they possibly could. Rising tide raises all ships, right?
Mhm.
So September 24th, we'll beat Ezra and Nehemiah, but we raised $314,375 on Kickstarter. And I think Ezra and Nehemiah did like 322,000 or something.
Okay.
Awesome.
But yeah, so before that, it was the highest funded Christian game on Kickstarter. And at the moment, Deliverance is the highest rated Christian game ever made, with an asterisk. You'll find things like Bibleopoly or something with like a 4.7 out of 5 stars on Amazon or whatever, but we're talking about like actual games that adults would want to play on their own. And so in addition, like if you want to say like the actual stats, we are the highest rated game on Board Game Geek in the religious category with an 8.7 out of 10. We have hundreds of reviews, thousands of players, and we entirely sold out of the game. We have some like resellers that have a few copies left, like under, maybe like 25 copies left or less, in the US and abroad. We have, they're just entirely sold out. But we became the hottest game on Board Game Geek in December. We held that for like 9 days in a row. It was a great
Nice.
time. Our sales volume doubled, and that's one of the reasons that we sold out so quick. But yeah, so it's was a labor of love. It was something that I never intended to actually publish. I just wanted to make it so that someone else could publish it, so that it could exist. It needed to exist is what I decided. I never intended to be a game designer. I already have a business. We didn't talk about it, but I have helped crowdfund over 200 different tabletop game projects, RPGs, board games,
Awesome.
Big IPs and unknown things and everything in between. But yeah, it's something that I never wanted to naturally do myself unless there was no other way. And there was no other way, because it turns out that most people think religious games suck and they would never really want to play them on their own. And so that's something that I had to, it's like either it doesn't exist or I make it, So.
And there it is sitting right behind you, right?
Yes, actually, we have let's see.
Yeah, that
Deliverance, the base, the actual game here, and then Council of the Fallen is the expansion that we're going to release on Kickstarter. And then this right here is the original prototype that I received with everyone's signature on it. So that's like my favorite section of the shelf.
Awesome. So Anthony, same question. Tell me a little bit about Allies.
Yeah, I actually over here, let me slip off camera to grab something. I had to move my massive copy of the Heroes 3 board game to get to this. It was on top of it. But anyway, so that, a little bit of exercise there. But yeah, I've got my Deliverance shirt on, trying to support, the interview here. And before we hop into my game, and I got my copy of, you can't really see it, of Deliverance with the Andrew signed with Allies of Majesty is next. So we'll get into talking about Allies of Majesty a bit. But speaking of his business with Next Level Web, I do intend to enlist Andrew's help in trying to beat his former record as well. So
nice.
So yeah, definitely enjoy. For anybody considering, I get people asking me questions about crowdfunding, and a lot of the knowledge I have came from Andrew Lowen's podcast, Crowdfunding Nerds, and you know, listening to that and just and other sources that they refer to. So I appreciate that. But anyway, with Allies of Majesty, it is a tabletop role-playing game, and my story, or if you remember, I was talking about Dungeons and Dragons as a the cartoon as a kid. And I used to have my mom read Revelation to me and stuff like that. Like, you know, I always wanted to read the Bible, and I thought that was so cool. And so I at the time the Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon was going, I really thought it was cool, but like I wanted there to be, I was like, that'd be cool if there was some kind of a game and a story and a world. But like, what if it didn't have like the magic-y witch skull guys and all the other stuff going on? I just could, as a kid, I didn't really feel entirely comfortable with it because of my religious beliefs. I felt like it was a little dark. And you know, I thought, what if there'd be something? I thought, oh, and I was thinking back to Revelation stuff, and I thought the spirit realm was kind of cool with the Bible stuff and all that. That's pretty cool. Except I could only think of two angels that were named. And so I thought of like Michael in our canon anyway, in the Protestant evangelical canon, you've got Michael and you've got Gabriel. And so in my thinking, like D&D world, you've got a fighter and like a quick guy, like the messenger type, you know, the rogue type that I call a messenger. So you've got a warrior and a messenger. And I thought, man, those are both martial classes. And I thought that would get kind of boring pretty quick. Like it'd be fun for a minute and then you'd tire out of it. So I dropped it and didn't think of it again. And then I'm holding my first child. I'm about 24 years old and walking around pacing while he's, you know, being fussy, got to do the dad thing. And so your mind wanders when you're just pacing back and forth. And I had just been, it was a Sunday. I'd just been to church that day. And I don't know if there was a scripture that they had mentioned then or what, but in my mind came two other things. Was the scripture that where it says, are they not all ministering spirits that, you know, ministering to those that will inherit salvation? Or that's my paraphrase. But anyway, that, and then also I thought about how like the ones in like Isaiah were singing holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, and in Revelation they're calling out. It doesn't directly say singing, but that's the way we think of it. And so I was like, in like, you know, the way you see it in the Christmas things where the angels show up and they declare, and we always think they're singing it, you know, we portray it that way. So I was thinking, okay, ministering spirits, and they could be like the clerics, like the support classes and all that. And then you've got minstrels, and they could be like powerful in the way they sing and all that. So I thought, that's it. Now it's interesting. Now it isn't going to get boring. And I hadn't thought about the game since way back when, but I couldn't help it. And I was at I was compelled, and I was in a job at the time where they had just stuck me in a model in a new home builder. And so since I was one of the people that was on salary and not commission, they stuck me in this place where nobody was going. They just needed the model open in case somebody wanted to see that house type. And also they wanted to see if, you know, if people that were getting their house built needed to contact the builder for some reason. I was the customer service guy. So that was it. I just opened it up and sat there most days, and I had a computer. So within 2 months, I had a 60-page game manual, and I brought it up to your house and we were playing it. But that's exactly it. It's one of those things where I was compelled to do it. I know it needed to exist, and I was going to do it. And I didn't know if it would ever be published or not. That's a whole longer story. I won't get into all that. But here I am 24 years after I first made it, and we're going to publish this thing. So, yeah. And
Awesome.
I guess you did you know, you kind of mentioned angels and that kind of stuff. That's the fun thing about Andrews and my games, is that we're both kind of overlapping a lot in the theme. And so people are like, when are you going to put out, you know, Deliverance, the role-playing game? He's like, well, my buddy's working on that, and he tags me, you know, or stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, I always tell people I have no true expertise in development of a role-playing game. I've traveled in these circles, but as a developer, I recognize this is an area, you might as well ask me to design a video game. This is an area that I do not know. Like, I know enough to know what's fun and what, you know, that kind of thing, but I don't know enough to make what's fun in a role-playing game, if that makes sense. So
Well, Anthony has definitely designed a very fun role-playing game, and there's a lot of like dynamic aspects to it of how you interact with the story and the characters, and even like non-combat situations. And I don't want to spoil too much of that, but what I do want to talk about next is some of the similarities and the crossovers between Deliverance and Allies of Majesty. So you both operate in a similar sphere, but what makes them different, and what makes yours
Sure. Yeah. So, the right on the surface, Deliverance is meant to be. I call it an RPG in the box, which Anthony's like, it's not an RPG in a box. RPGs can't be in a box. They're books. But I, so just like kind of as a general rule, it's like C.S. Lewis's analogy of the father and the son is actually not a very good analogy when you actually break it down, and but it's the best we have. And so, I oftentimes will tell people it's like that RPG in a box. And when people think of the RPG in a box experience, they think, okay, I'm going to level up. It's got like a campaign that, my character will get more awesome. I'll find weapons. I'll find, new secrets and, get new abilities and things like that. And, there's this connotation with stats and how increasing your stats is going to make you more awesome in, just more powerful. And all of that is generally true with Deliverance. You'll fight really bad guys, and so I guess maybe I should explain what Deliverance is thematically. Deliverance is a game where you're playing angels in the spirit realm. You're fighting against demons and in tactical combat. But then there are these saints that are around you in the mortal realm. So in similar manner to Allies of Majesty, you control an angel. But the way that it works in Deliverance, it's a little bit, I'll say, I guess in my view, it would be a higher fantasy or just a different type of fantasy than Allies of Majesty, or maybe low fantasy. I'm not sure what the actual terminology is here, but the idea is the main characters are the angels, the supporting cast are the humans, and you really only use the humans, we'll say, as objectives on the battlefield, because Deliverance is a skirmish, like a tactical skirmish game. So in similar manner to like Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem video games, or maybe like Zombicide or Gloomhaven, board games, or Cthulhu Death May Die. That's another one I get a lot of comparisons to, or Unmatched, Tales to Amaze. That's another one that a lot of people tend to compare to Deliverance because of the feel. It's like a dudes on a map punching each other, but then you have these saints that are around that impact the battle as well. So where Deliverance innovates and becomes very different than Allies of Majesty is the darkness. So when you're fighting in combat against these demons, you also have the threat of darkness that is kind of this evil stuff bleeding in from the human realm, the mortal realm. And, it represents the evils of the world, the fallen nature of the world, the evil things people do to each other, the works of the devil, and various afflictions like that. And so you will encounter these cards that you can't punch, but you have to pray against in order to cast them down. So the game is a little bit of a balance of, can you hold the darkness back long enough in order to vanquish your foes, because you win the game by beating the demons. And the game is really a big boss battler. A lot of people will look at a game like Dark Souls as very similar to Deliverance in many ways, but it's kind of like my love letter to the MMORPG boss, where you fight this huge epic boss. It's like, how can we ever win? And he gets more and more gnarly every round and kind of starts to evolve and do crazier stuff. And it's like, you've got to be able to knock that guy out and his hordes to actually win the game. But then the game ends, right? And so that's a skirmish mode. It's like a one shot. You can just sit down and play. But then there's a campaign, which is 14 missions that, are sequentially kind of strung together. And you experience a story, and then the game is completed. You're actually also able to go back through each of those missions and play them in what are called the challenge rules. The challenges are much more difficult versions of those missions, kind of like, video game wise, like Emerald, Ruby, or Omega Weapon from Final Fantasy series. If you want to fight the boss that's harder than the last boss, then the challenge missions are the thing that you're looking for So some people, you know, there are a lot of people attracted to the game. Some people love the theme, but others just really, really, really love the challenge. And that's what Deliverance has to offer in spades. So that's kind of maybe some of the similarities. Anthony, what do you think?
I know. I think it's very much. It's just literally the same core concepts. And when you were talking about fantasy, those terms, it depends on who's using them. I think high fantasy is more like elves and dwarves and all that kind of stuff. So we would both be more like spiritual fantasy. We'd be fantasy because of the way, like, you know, the types of weaponry and stuff that we use and all that, the way that kind of plays out and the abilities. But I think it would be more like supernatural fantasy, or I don't know. I guess I'd say spiritual because supernatural implies like horror, like Cthulhu or something a lot of times. But yeah, but they completely overlap on those realms. I mean, you know, you've got things where, you know, you have saints that their prayers kind of help. The more you flip over, it keeps the darkness from building up over. The more you free them, it keeps the darkness from overflowing and hurting you. Just the same, a lot of our involvement in Allies of Majesty, the reason we're able to be sent out on these missions is tightly linked to human prayers and supplication to God and asking him to intervene in these circumstances. And so he doesn't just, hey, go do this sometimes, but mostly he doesn't. He's usually like stirring up saints to prayer. And that prayer then he uses as justification to send out because he wants to. We see back from the garden, God wants to link his co-rule the world, the earth, through his human imagers. And so, you know, you just do it in a mechanic, and I do it in a story mode because it's a little more story oriented. But it's the same thing. You know, in so many ways they overlap in that. Just again, the angels, the characters, in a sense, it's kind of that way in that you don't die. In that, you know, because if you lose in the campaign, you come back in your game with an extra little bonus. You get to try
Yeah, you
again,
get some
but
favor.
you get like
Right.
a little bit of favor that gives you a better chance at winning it in the replay. And it happens in Allies of Majesty sometimes. Now we've got to justify it with the story, but sometimes your party goes out to do something and they get smashed. And if it's something that isn't time urgent, you might need to rally up some prayer and go back out and try it again. You know, because you know I've heard you quote this multiple times, but in Daniel, where in other interviews, but where Daniel's talking about the angel saying to him that he was held up for 21 days by the Prince of Persia. It's like sometimes you'll get delayed, whether that's however that manifests. It might be that you can imagine this epic 21-day battle, or it might be that he got captured and held for a little bit till he was released, or it might be that, you know, he got defeated and had to keep coming back. He just got delayed, detained, held up for that. It doesn't say, so we can kind of play with it and
Yeah.
make up stuff. But that's one of the things where it's kind of like, you know, you're not trying to make an RPG. I'm not necessarily trying to cover a board game either, because you cover a lot of that. You know, it's the theme is being served. That audience that wants the theme is being serviced in the board game area right now, in the tactical board game. The only and I like, because Allies is such a tactical game in the way the combat works, that it really does feel like, you know, thematically Deliverance the RPG. It's just what you were referencing earlier about high and low, is that I'm just going where you're going more for the relatable upfront, Frank Peretti style angels, you know,
Yeah.
that have maybe an
That's a
ethnic
great
look to
example.
them, and that
Like
have,
two
you know,
wings, very,
gendered
very
and
kind of
that kind of stuff.
cultural,
What's that?
like cultural tropish in some ways,
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
they're
yeah.
relatable based
And
on
the
what
halos,
people
and you've got the,
think
you
they
know,
understand. Yep.
yeah, yeah, you've got that more in like a gamey where people can see us say, "Oh, cool, angels." I'm kind of and I hope I'm hesitant to do this because I never know how you'll take it, and I've never done it with you, I don't think. But like I kind of view it like you've got the burden more for the Lewis kind of thing, C.S. Lewis, where it's like it's immediate, relatable, it's upbeat, people are happy to do it, they're ready, excited, the imagery. Where I've got more of this, I've got to build a whole world. I'm getting into the
Yep.
ancient Near Eastern writings and the biblical, you know, and parabiblical writings and the other related cultures, and I'm trying to build this world based on the ancient Near Eastern conceptions of the spiritual realm and
Yep.
their mythology. And so it's just that, one's deeper and I have to make up Elvish,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of like that where, yeah, exactly. Yours
It
is more
definitely,
readily digestible right off the bat and appealing.
yeah, I try to make sure the game is as theologically sound as a fantasy
Yeah,
can be, but
yeah,
I recognize that it's got to be fantasy. It can't be perfect.
yeah,
Perfect is actually for mortals is the enemy of good enough.
yeah,
If it was perfect, it would just never be made because I
yeah,
can't make anything perfect, right? So why try? And instead, what I've decided to do is, try to be as theologically sound as I can where possible. But then in other areas, when we diverge from what is theologically sound, for example, the way the angels look, Michael has sick tattoos and is kind of looking a little bit like William Wallace if he power lifted. That's probably not what Michael looked like. Although I will wager to say that he probably looks a little closer to that than like the faint red-haired little girl that they portrayed him as in the 14th century, So,
yeah.
but I don't know, I could be wrong. If I was Michael, I'd be like, I'll go with the tattoos. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
So
I don't do the same thing. I don't do the same with this. The things that I'm doing are like it's not what you see floating around. One of these days I'm going to do a video on that. It's not what you see floating around the internet of the biblically accurate angels and the freaky things with just a bunch of wings and a giant eye or something like that. It's like I'm using imagery from actual stuff like Ezekiel's vision, Revelation, and that kind of stuff. I'm just kind of diving back into that a little deeper. And but yeah, I don't. I'm with you. I think a lot of neither of us are hitting that. I don't think that would make a very compelling game to have the little cherub,
Right.
angels that they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, like a tiny little angel with like super strength and swords and
If you
stuff.
did
I
it in
would be
anime, I bet you it would sell.
terrified.
Yeah.
Just like one finger stopping an axe.
Yeah.
It would sell, and if it was an anime.
Andrew, I know you've only had one session so far of Allies, so you have a limited snapshot of what you can expect. But what stood out to you about playing a tabletop role-playing game?
Well, there's a lot of crossover between tabletop RPGs and the understanding that I kind of developed through pop culture, video games, other JRPGs and things like that. One series of games that was particularly helpful just in understanding was Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
and Champions of Norath and other games like that just kind of familiarize you with generally what to expect. And being around this, kind of we'll say culture for a long time, it becomes a lot easier to ingest the information. Um, and that's I think just a really important point is that I knew that coming in, I would understand very intuitively and very quickly how to deal damage, how to heal, how to, where my character's strengths lie, and or that I should try to play to those strengths. And, things like that. What I didn't understand, or rather, what I didn't have any firsthand experience with, was working with a dice system.
Mm.
I market, some of, for example, like Modifius, they have a 2D20 system with their products. I do a lot of their, we do like the Fallout RPG, Dune, and Conan, and Acts on Cthulhu, and Conan, and lots of others. And so I'm familiar with systems. I'm also familiar with, the typical D&D system, which has like one of each dice. You've got your percent die and your 10-sided and your 12-sided and your 20 and your 4 and your 6 and whatever. I've marketed a lot of those games. And so one of the big things that I knew was that the dice system is always a big deal. It's like, what system are you running? Is it compatible with 5e? Is it Pathfinder? Is it whatever, right? And so that's one, and if it's not, then we have to have an understanding. I have to be able to explain to a dungeon master or GM, right? The person who's going to actually get this thing, learn the rules, and tell everybody what to do. The human rule book, right? I have to be able to justify to that person why they should get this game instead of continue playing what they're used to. And so that I've had a lot of experience doing those types of things for tabletop RPGs in particular. But where what I found so I guess that was maybe I got into a little bit of a digression, but like in general, what stood out to me the most was, and this is actually an area I was so unprepared, like Illidan from World of Warcraft, like you were not prepared. I was not prepared to kind of let loose in a social context. Like that was not at all what I don't know why I didn't expect that, but it was like I just it was like if you watch Lord of the Rings and you see how Aragorn talks to Theoden and Theoden responds, that is not a conversation that you can have with another human. You are not you were not well educated enough to have that conversation, right? Just the diction they use. They're each like Shakespeare, But also the feeling comfortable to open up is something that is very different. Whereas a tabletop game in the board game space, or like a social deduction game, or even a game like Exploding Kittens, those games, they make boring people fun. They help boring people to have fun, but they also help them to be fun, And like my mom, she was just swinging a sword, bloodthirsty as Michael the Archangel for 2 hours, and it was so funny to watch, and to play with her, when we played Deliverance the first time. But that's not really something that she would do. She's just so reserved and quiet and whatnot. And so when I got into the RPG, I'm like, I'm going to do my best. I want to like be the RPG. I don't want to be Andrew. I want to be my character, which was a messenger, right? And
Yeah.
but I found that it is a skill to think through what you're going to say and to say it, and I don't know how else I can explain it, but that was a real surprise for me. So it wasn't a
Awesome.
bad thing. It was just like I was like totally unexpected.
That's part of the fun of exploring a character too, is like you might think in your head they're going to be a certain way, and then you start playing them and you're like, I made different decisions than I thought I was going to, or maybe this is this character. I don't know. There's a lot of fun there. So Anthony, I'm going to change this question just a little bit for you. What was it like? What was something that stood out from hosting for Andrew and his first game?
Yeah, yes. With Andrew specifically, I'd say that your board gaming and your other video gaming and all that experience came through because you didn't know this, but almost nobody picked that messenger. If they picked the messenger, they pick it because they want to be the ranged person with a bow or whatever. They want to be off in the distance. And this character that he picked is a dual wielding sword, get up in there and mix it up, and not a hardy character, but a very effective character, and it goes along with your rogue experience from World of Warcraft, I'm sure. But you were able to hop in and take the role and do the role and use the abilities correctly. And that's what I noticed, is that you were feeling out the social side of it. And wait a second, this character has to do more than activate abilities,
Yep.
and move around on the like I actually can encourage my allies or receive encouragement from them verbally in the
Yeah.
battle and it have a tangible effect on the game. Or I can discourage the enemy or whatever it is, Yeah, it was definitely. I noticed you were like a fish in water in the one, and a fish not out of water, but just more like an amphibian taking its first steps out of water on the other.
Yeah. Darwin's missing link. It's me.
Yes.
Yeah. It definitely felt it felt fun. Just, I really, really enjoyed the experience. You hosted we went to Origins, and my whole internal team for Deliverance, I had 5 members there, and you hosted all of us, and some of us were much more experienced than others in RPGs.
Yeah.
And one thing that really stood out to me, there's two of our guys, Dan and Adam, are in particular. Dan is making like a tabletop game. He's making a tabletop system, and he's been doing that with his brother for like as long as I can remember. And Adam is a very, very experienced player, but he's much more quiet and analytical. And so the way that the two of them approached it, Dan was basically just threw down the gauntlet at this demon kind of captain that was we started talking to this guy, and then Dan just started talking so much trash to him that they fought us. And Anthony's like, so I can't remember. I think it was Adam was like, can we ask him this or that? And he's like, Anthony's like, nope, he's pretty mad. He's not going to talk
could
anymore.
have earlier, but not now. I mean, you
Yeah.
could try, but
Yeah, but Dan just stood up and went on this epic tirade of do this right now or we are going to smite you. This is our territory now. And kind of embarrassed the captain in front of his minions.
Yeah.
So he had to fight, otherwise he would kind of lose renown in their eyes and maybe not even be the captain anymore, right? So that was a quite a fun experience.
And I think you almost lightly touched on our next question there, so it's a great segue. But what stood out to you about playing a Christian tabletop role-playing game? Because now we're getting into like the fundamentals of what was happening and what your characters were like.
Yeah, well, first thing, specific to Allies of Majesty, one thing what I expected, going back to some expectations, I expected it's as much about combat and feeling awesome. Like everyone needs their moment of awesomeness kind of thing, to feel like they had fun. And when we tell stories, we're not going to tell stories about how I rolled dice unless it was a 1. We're going to tell stories about what happened, right? Like the dice are your helpers to tell a story. It's like, I swung my, my epic pole arm or whatever, my spear, and was able to stab this guy right in the middle of the air. And, it was awesome. And I wasn't like, I rolled a 17 and my strength stat was high enough or whatever. Right. Or my might stat. And so we kind of tell ourselves these stories anyway, but something that I really enjoyed were, mechanically the angels being near each other kind of would benefit the angels in a way, kind of like I guess the simplest way I can explain it is increasing their power level by being close to each other. Kind of we're able to do that, and that was thematically on brand. And the various demons had unique and very thematically interesting skills. They were like, okay, they weren't like tropish, like, oh, this guy's the tank, this one's the mage, you always have to interrupt the mage, and then this one's the priest, which will heal. And so just take the mage out, stop the priest from healing or whatever, like you would in an MMO. But there were certain things that were really different that really stood out to me. One, and the primary one, is probably the story and the way that your characters had to interact with the story that you had created, Anthony, because we had this there was this boy in a town that had kind of become I guess he's like possessed by demons, or he's being assaulted in some way, and it's been a little while, I'm trying to remember, but he is playing with demons and talking with demons, spirits and whatnot. So we actually couldn't just go there and whoop the demons like in Deliverance. You would just go there and just smack the demons, and then that's how that game works. But then what we had to do instead was we had to go and encourage Timothy, who was a kind of a messenger of God in the town. We had to find him, which is why we got in the fight with all the demons, because we asked them where they were in a way that was super harsh. And so we eventually had to go to Timothy, and we had to encourage him to pray. And it was a very, we kind of had to stir him to action. He was asleep. We had to get him to wake up and to, all of a sudden just get something burning inside that spirit that would say, yes, you need to talk to this kid. And the way that we interacted was really thoughtful and made me actually feel like an angel in doing what I was doing. And that particular experience, you could not replicate that in D&D. So it's just, that's not something you could replicate in D&D because of the nature of it's kind of a power fantasy, right? Everybody's got their I'm a wizard. I've got my wand of magic missiles and I punch stuff, with magic missiles, and I use a fireball and it's great. And now I'm out of juice. Help me not die. Right. That's, and that's like where the story comes from. It's just like the movie, the D&D movie was about hijinks that always go wrong. And that's kind of what I come to expect from D&D. But then Allies of Majesty, you can have that, which we did in the fight, but then also you have these really, I'll say, touching moments of thoughtfulness in the story that kind of pulls you out of that combat and we're just gonna mind control these goblins off a cliff or whatever, and it pulls you into, oh wow, like how do we get this guy to, like, how do we get his spirit burning within him so that he thinks about this person in need that's in the town. It's like, well, I can't really, you can't punch him in the head or whatever, or give him a dream and beat him up and say, hey, dummy, you need to do the thing, like, like the angels of deliverance might do. And so that was a very cool moment. It was like a very special moment. It's like, it would be great to include something like that in Deliverance, because it's, but it's too hard. The methodology that we have to tell the story is a couple of lines on a page. Whereas, with a tabletop RPG, you've got the DM, which kind of acts like the rails on a bowling alley, that helps the players kind of stay kind of generally going in the same direction or the right direction. And so that's it was definitely something I'll remember for a long time.
Awesome.
And it actually wasn't preachy or cheesy. That's another thing that I wouldn't say surprised me in particular, because I had some experience with Allies of Majesty, seeing it and was like, okay, this is a different take than I would make. Like my angels look in a certain way and yours do in a different way, and that's on purpose. But that's just stylistic choices and other things like that. But what was behind it was really well thought out and well reasoned, which I think is actually quite important when you're making a Christian anything. You're actually not allowed to do anything just because it's cool. People will say, well, where is it written that that's okay or whatever, right? It's like, you have to have an answer. You can't just be like, well, I just thought, an angel throwing a fireball was cool. It's like, well, why, how can you justify this, that an angel has the power of a fire? It's like, well, there's an angel in the power with the power of fire, Revelation 17:5, bro, or whatever, right? So anyway.
Anthony has definitely done an exhaustive amount of research on all of the symbolism and methods and allies. I would probably say more so than most games. And so there isn't anything you can point to in allies where he's not like, allow me to get the scripture for you. Or at least
what I just, Revelation 75 is actually Mystery Babylon the Great, the harlot, but it was Revelation 14:18. There you go.
Nice.
I don't want to be, when people fact check me, they're gonna
right.
be like, yep, that was the dumbest.
So Anthony, when you have to sell this game, talk to people at conventions, when you're discussing the game at large, you have to breach that topic that it is a Christian tabletop role-playing game. What do you tell people when you have this conversation?
It depends on the setting, really. Am I talking to Christians or am I talking to non-Christians? So one of the words that's helped a lot, and it's helped a lot with non-Christians, like this year at Origins, and it seems to be, it's a word I've debated back and forth, because to Christians, some Christians, not all, but some Christians, they find it questionable or offensive, is the word mythology. And because they're thinking Mythbusters, is it, let's bust the myth. Let's see what's whether it's true or not true. But that's like the second definition. The first one, and I made a video on this, but the first one is talking about an explanation of why the world is the way it is, or why our situation is how it is. And it's usually involving supernatural beings and or events. And that's exactly the Bible. And so I'm dealing with an ancient Near Eastern mythology. And it's also nice because people say, well, I don't think that's a proper theology. I'm like, I'm not necessarily trying to teach theology. I'm trying to create a world that is built around what is expressed in writing that the ancient Israelites specifically and their neighbors, but specifically the Israelites believed. And so I'm not trying to say it's true. I'm not saying to say it plays out that way. I'm just trying to create a world that reflects that. And so accurately, or uses the imagery. If I'm skewing something here, I'm making a creative license on something. I want it to still reflect something, even though it doesn't lay this thing out. It still reflects other imagery that's true to the mythology and that kind of stuff. So that helps. And so I've really found I'm surprised. I was surprised. I'm less surprised now, but I've really found that there is really a lot of openness in non-Christian. You found the same thing, Andrew, with Deliverance in non-Christian players if you're coming at it not preachy. And I think what hurts a lot of other Christian attempts at role-playing games are that they put you in the shoes of a human Christian. And so in doing so, if a non-Christian wants to play the game, then they are put in a spot where they feel like they're being asked to behave out, to act out a religion that they're not believing, and then as a practitioner of it. And then the other side of it is even Christians feel a little bit weird because it's like, well, I'm supposed to be a Christian, but there's this fight. Can I kill those guys? Is that because you're dealing with you're mortals dealing with mortals, and you come into all those questions? And the feedback I've gotten from non-Christians is that the mythological take is what frees them to participate willingly and happily and not have all these issues. So it's one of those things where it depends on who I'm talking to, but I just kind of lay it out that it's a fun place and way to explore, to play. It's like a sandbox for this mythology, just like it would be if you were trying to learn a different setting. If you're trying to play a game in Middle Earth, it's a sandbox where you're learning Middle Earth and exploring all the relationships between, these characters and those and this race and those. You're doing the same thing, but you're doing it with biblical ancient beliefs, Yeah.
Awesome. So let's get towards the wrap up here. I want to ask one more question of Andrew, and then we can get some parting shots. Andrew, if you met somebody at a convention and you wanted to tell them about Allies and bring them over to the table, what would you say to that person to introduce them to the game?
Well, I would say Allies of Majesty is an awesome RPG that I had a really fun time with, that kind of blends traditional like combat with a new innovative dice system, and a very, very innovative storytelling mechanism. So the storytelling mechanism kind of helps players. One of the things, actually, it's a little bit of a digression, but one of the problems that a lot of people have with a game like with an RPG is the openness. And every so often you hear about somebody that you would think is very normal lives out some very like gnarly, awful thing in a game in an RPG. And Allies of Majesty kind of lends itself, without actually telling people, well, you can't do that. It kind of gives people the almost like it's a positive game, rather than being like a dark game that you feel like we just unleashed Jumanji, now we have to finish this and put so we can close the box, and just I don't feel good about myself. I just left feeling so good, and fresh, but even though we were playing for 5 hours or something, 6 hours. So the way that I would describe it is you play an angel that can generally fit your style. It has a similar enough class system to an RPG that like D&D, that you would be able to pick up on it pretty quick. You can customize your character to kind of have strengths in certain areas that are to your taste, just like an RPG. But you're going to play an epic angel, and you're going to battle against demons and deal with spiritual matters that have true significance. It's like the lady coming out saying, there are giant rats in my garage, or there are spiders in my basement. Like we've all done that. And I've never rolled a D20 in D&D, and I've done that tons of times. And so there are some certain things that like are rather tropish. And now it forces players to think in a different way. you know, and rather than like, I'm just gonna punch it, or maybe I'll kiss it or whatever. That's like generally how they think. They think using what I call the crocodile brain in like a traditional RPG. It's like, should I run from it? Should I kill it? Should I eat it? Should I whatever? Those are the things the crocodile brain thinks about. And and that can actually become rather dry in an RPG setting. And I think that what I enjoyed about Allies was that it just felt so rich in story, and that the story was paired like a great wine with a perfectly aged cheese, with the combat. So I really enjoyed the combination. It was a very different formula. Also, I'll say the dice system was a 70-12 system. And where if you had a certain, let's say you had a certain prowess in a very particular, like if you were, high on your might stats or whatever, you'd be able to punch things. And you can, in essence, it kind of boils down to being able to change dice. So you have a certain threshold that marks success, and and you can like you get to adjust your dice a certain number of times, and that really kind of helps so you can get success or critical successes, and that really helps to kind of it lends itself to I rolled and I got a 1 or something. Like there's no like total, it's rare, it's more uncommon having like a total failure, or like just this critical success where you threw your sword at a dragon, hit it right in the heart, and match is over, or the game's over. So it's a little bit more it's less swingy, and it's has a much more of an emphasis on innovative storytelling than I've ever seen. So
Outstanding. That
yeah.
is a great note to take that out on. So before we go, I also know that you have a Kickstarter coming up soon. Do you want to plug that for the listeners?
Yeah, so Deliverance Council of the Fallen is an expansion to the award-winning Deliverance game. We have so we're coming back to the town of Fallbrook. The game picks up immediately from where the first one left off. The Angels have kind of saved Fallbrook from this we'll say this threat, and yet Fallbrook is still doomed. There is a saint that has come back, that is returning from to the land, and he's receiving a lot of demonic attention. You recognize that the key to the town's survival is the saint. So but at the same time, there's this rebel council, which is the Council of the Fallen, kind of pairing in a tongue-in-cheek way against or with Michael Heiser's Divine Council. So if there's a Divine Council, there's a Fallen Council. So the Council of the Fallen is actually rejected the devil as their leader, and they want to establish their own kingdom on Earth. The devil, the prequel, the what do you say, the prologue is that the devil walking into the Council of the Fallen saying, "This is my power." He takes off his breastplate with his 9 stones that mark his power, which described in Ezekiel 28:13. He takes those 9 stones and he sets them down, kind of like infinity stones, if you will. Gives one to each prince around the council, and says, all you have to do is just decide who will receive the power, give all the stones to that person, they'll ascend and bear my authority and my power on this earth. And so the mission is all about the council trying to cause we'll say shenanigans in the spirit realm and among the mortals. So there's stuff going on reflected among the mortal realm, and then Satan with a master plan that may extend beyond time. So we are we're gonna have a lot of fun. It's a big box expansion, so it's gonna just about double the content in the Deliverance game. And if you like Deliverance, you got to get this. If you've never heard of Deliverance before, if you like the idea of slaying demons by the epic righteous power of God, then you should give it a chance.
Outstanding. Definitely gonna have to check that out. We'll make sure that the links to that go into this video when it drops, so that anybody who's listening to this as fresh content can just check it out in the comments. Fantastic, gentlemen. Parting shots, Anthony, is there anything you want to say to the viewers? Anything you would like to head out on?
I just want to thank Andrew for coming on and just sharing his experience. I know that the guys had a lot of fun, and I just wanted to see if we could get that shared from the horse's mouth to other people. I did want to say you were out of all the groups. I ran it 8 times at Origins, and out of all the groups, and I had scheduled for a 4-hour session, and we all finished. Everybody finished the entire storyline except for your group, because you got hung up once you did the prayer thing and you stepped out for a second to grab some food, and that got people talking, and then they were just talking the rest of the time, and then we just like, let's
Yep.
just end it here. It's like, but you were the only entirely Christian group. Most of these others were non-believers. So it was interesting to me to see how it impacted you guys, that interaction where you were stirring Timothy to prayer or whatever. So that was my one thing that didn't get covered in the whole thing. I wanted to mention, because it impacted me as the GM to see the difference between these other groups I ran it with and then the impact it had here. So I'm excited to see and hear the stories of what other Christians that play it have as well.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I'll say kind of as my parting shot. So when I developed Deliverance, I never intended it to be played by a non-Christian, and because of that, my kind of my starting, you know, like right from the very beginning, I decided that it didn't need to preach at anybody, because if the only people that play it are Christians, then they're all saved and they don't need to be preached at, right? So we're working on sanctification, not salvation, right, anymore. And as a result of that, it turned out that non-Christians really loved it because it didn't preach. So it was a very safe way to engage with really the most well-established lore base in the entire world. I mean, the Bible's the number one selling book year after year, right? But the experiences that people get are just, it's really special. I think when you can, and there's no other game that I will say that I think does a better job of giving people that kind of that experience than Allies of Majesty. Deliverance does its job really well, but it's not necessarily because it doesn't have that storytelling component. You can get the game into the hands of a good GM that is a Christian, and he'll be able to give people an experience that's like light years beyond what I feel like you could get from just with a normal group. It's a beer and pretzels type of game. D&D is pretty much a beer and pretzels experience. It's less about the actual what's happening and like we're playing this game, we need to level and whatever. More, it's less about that and more about like who I'm around the table with, and we're having fun, we're enjoying ourselves,
Yep.
and that kind of thing. So I feel like Allies of Majesty just kind of takes it up a level, which is welcomed. Honestly, like I said, I sell like millions of dollars of RPGs every year. I sell multi-million dollars of RPGs, and they're generally marketed as beer and pretzels. Same reason that you would want to play this is reason you want to play that. It's all about the theme. It's like, oh, you want to play Avatar: The Last Airbender? Oh, you want to play in Fallout World? Oh, you want to play in Dunes World? It's like all these systems that you kind of understand, and I think that there's something that's kind of missing. Sometimes people will say, oh, well, let's focus on story because that's what our group wants to do, or whatever, right? But I think Allies has this natural, without trying to force it on the players, it has this natural ability to kind of get you to care about the story. And I think that's one of the most important things in a game is like, who am I? What am I doing? And why should I care? And I think Allies has a better answer than default RPGs, so
Thank you.
yeah. So there's my parting shot.
Wonderful parting shot. Very in-depth, very well thought out. Thank you both for taking the time to sit down and do this interview. I think we can sign off here. My name's Emanuel Class with Anthony D'Astello and Andrew Lowen talking Deliverance and Allies of Majesty.
All right.
Thank you.
See y'all.
you.